Herald of Anguish, although this card could very well be very evil if played correctly. First off, this thing has Improvise, which means if you're a black deck that runs a lot of artifacts, you would get this in for the oh-so-low cost of 2 black mana. Kind of similar to a card like Tombstalker if you do run a lot of artifacts. But the cost not only is something to be scared of, it's what this card does after that that really should be, well, terrifying. First of all, if you get this to stick for at least one turn, your opponents are going to be discarding cards. Second of all, if you do use a lot of artifacts to pay for this card's cost, you can then use the rest of your mana that you didn't use to sacrifice those artifacts and kill all your opponent's little creatures. In short, this is not only a big creature, but it can also be sort of used in the form of a board wipe. Likely this will see some play in some EDH decks. If you know you like to run artifacts in your black deck, then there's no reason for you to play this. This thing is just ridiculous, and it may even see some standard play as well if these decks, well, do happen to exist. Black's legendary creature is Yenny the Undying Partisan, which happens to be an Aetherborn vampire. Kind of an interesting combination of creature types. Considering Black seems to specialize in destroying opponents' creatures, it's pretty easy to get Yenny's first ability to trigger. In addition, it does have haste, which allows you to, well, be aggressive and, well, as you can tell, considering that Black will likely be destroying lots of creatures, it will be likely a very big creature very, very early in the game, or soon after you play it. The last ability is actually pretty nice, considering that, well, it's going to protect Yenny when he is really, really large. It's also nice to note that it could likely see some play in other decks outside of Standard that use things like the whole Aristocrat theme, or even the Malira wannabe like Collected Company, Pod decks, Eldritch Evolution thing. You get what I'm saying. It's a very, very likely player in a deck like that. It likely has a role in that. And it can also be used as sort of a, how do I say it, kind of an alternate win condition in a deck like that. The point is, Yenny will likely see some play in one of those formats, and likely for a reason of a similar purpose, if not that reason alone. Yenny's expertise is basically sort of a Languish, although it's not quite as good as Languish, arguably. You do get to cast another spell with CMC 3 or less. Although -3/-3 is pretty good, I feel like having this replace Languish is actually quite likely, considering there are really not too many creatures that have over 4 power. There are some, but they're kind of few and far in between, and likely they can be taken out with like a big giant removal spell. The point is, this will likely see some play, especially if your opponent thinks about going long on you. Do expect to get some of these soon, and do expect them to see quite a bit of play. It's not going to be a surprise if they are. To me, the rest of Black's rares seem kind of underwhelming, but I feel like they could have potential for something or other. Let's start off with Secret Salvage. This is a pretty ridiculous tutor, but only if you're really playing a constructed format. This is kind of an awful card in EDH, simply because you're not going to be able to fetch additional copies of the card that you exiled. Whoops. But frankly, I feel like if you really do need a card, or if you're basically basing your deck around a certain card, this may be actually nice, as you not only get 1, but up to 3 copies of whatever cards you want to get. Pretty ridiculous, but it's not likely that you're going to really need a whole bunch of cards. I mean, there likely will be some scenarios will be phenomenal, but other scenarios, well, it would just be kind of meh. Also, depending on what card you're fetching, it is likely you may or may not want to play all that card in a turn, but that's another story, another thing to evaluate based on the deck that you're building. Frankly, I don't think this card's awful, but it's nothing to be spectacular, and like I said, this is probably one of the worst cards you could ever play in EDH, simply because it has pretty much no relevance, except exiling 1 card in your graveyard for 5 mana. Glint Sleeve Siphoner wants to be Bob, but like several attempts in the past, it's nowhere near close, and arguably probably one of the weakest attempts. Like I say, you will need some energy, and having energy before this thing comes to play really does help it out a lot. But honestly, this thing's nowhere near close to whatever anything Bob will be. One thing I will say though, it does have Menace, so if you know your opponent doesn't play removal spells in Standard, then maybe you'll be able to get some value out of it, if you do live long enough, or it does live long enough to really get there for you. Moving on to something we've never seen at all in Magic the Gathering's history, Aetherborn Tribal. I mean, you're going to have to want some adaptive automatons for this guy, but seriously, I don't think Aetherborn Tribal really is a thing. There are really not too many Aetherborns to begin with, and if so, they're likely going to have to be some coming down the road, so that cards like this can really work well with them. If you somehow have a way to sacrifice your Aetherborns or have them die in some sort of shape or fashion, you can get some card advantage off of this guy. But frankly, I'm not too impressed with this, at least not at the moment. But if Aetherborns ever become released in more multitudes, then do keep your eye out for this guy. It definitely will come back to visit you if you are a fan of this tribe. Lastly, the story rare for Black is Battle at the Bridge, and frankly, I'm not too impressed with this. I don't necessarily think it's awful. I think it could have its purposes, but I'm not too impressed with it. I really think this should have been like something like a Consume Spirit. That would have been really great. But this is just kind of a, I want to say like a Tendrils of Corruption, if anything, except rather than counting swamps, it does for artifacts, but it does do it for mana too, so you can pay for mana. So likely, if you have a lot of artifacts and a lot of mana, you could probably kill damn near anything and gain a lot of life, which I guess in some matchups will be really good, but in others it will just be kind of average in a sense, if you know what I'm saying. You just kind of wish it would damage players too, and maybe cost maybe one more black mana. Yeah. Moving on to the uncommons, Black does have some decent uncommons. One I was a little bit surprised of was this Edict-like effect, the Perilous Predicament. I like a lot of Black's uncommons and commons in the set, mainly because they actually have a lot of ways to get rid of artifacts and artifact creatures. And this is one of them here. It does sacrifice an artifact creature. It basically is sacrifice 2 creatures for 5 mana, which is a bit of an issue, but you do have to keep in mind this can specify an artifact creature. So if there's a really annoying artifact creature that your opponent needs to get rid of and you're playing Black, this may be a way to do it. Although 5 mana is a bit of a stretch, but this is just one way to do it. I'm also personally a fan of Sly Requisitioner. I think that this card can be taken into account that it has basically a really nice ability for sacrificing artifacts, and considering, like I said before, there's a lot of ways to regain these artifacts and recycle them, this will be likely played in some sort of deck that uses this ability to its greatest extent. And no joke, I really like this card, and having Improvised in addition means you can get it out sooner and just start sacrificing artifacts to get value from when those artifacts leave the battlefield, and getting more board presence in addition to that. Moving on to another one of my favorite uncommons in the set, Fail Push basically replaces cards like Disfigure. You could argue this is arguably a Black version of Path to Exile, although it isn't quite as versatile. It can't kill anything with CMC 5 or greater, and I mean, the revolt ability is nice, which means that if one of your creatures dies, you can get up to at least the 4 CMC range. But seriously, this is a fantastic card. It's going to see play in Modern. It may even see play in Legacy. It's a great removal spell, great for stuffing early game aggression, great against all the annoying aggro decks, actually. A fantastic card for Black. Get your copies if you intend to play any sort of constructed format. It's wonderful. Yes, it'll see play in Standard too. I'm pretty confident it will. And just because it has no color restrictions or power restrictions, it's just solid. And considering players really like to play efficient creatures, it's likely... It's phenomenal. Enough said. I'm done here. Like Blue, Black has a lot of very impressive commons, like the 4th Bridge Prowler, which is basically the best Festering Goblin ever printed. Notice how it says May on the card, so it prevents killing itself. That's pretty smart. The Sorcerer Turn is also pretty pushed. I mean, Raise Dead and a card, that's pretty darn sweet if I say so myself. Although you do have to have an artifact to get it in full effect. I'm pretty sure there is going to be some decks that will use that to its greatest extent. Moving on to more vehicle destruction, we have Daring Demolition, which destroys a creature or vehicle. Like I said, this is another Black card that, technically speaking, destroys artifacts. It's pretty darn sweet, and hey, I mean, although it is a bit heavy on the CMC side, getting rid of a vehicle for Black is pretty huge and pretty momentous. We haven't had a whole lot of artifact destruction in Black at all, and this is a pretty big step when you really think about it, despite the fact that it's not super exciting of a CMC. Black also seems to be in tune with the whole revolt thing, and I mean, sacrificing creatures and, well, destroying creatures or destroying your creatures can trigger this ability, but giving a creature -3/-3 does seem pretty good, especially if you can spam it over and over and over again. And just like that Harpooner in white, there is no difference, and I think you know where I'm going from here. I'm just sounding like a broken record.